Hey guys, welcome back to the JP Podcast. Today we have Eric Grafstrom. Did I say it right?
You did. Well done, George.
Awesome. Yeah. And for those of you guys that are entrepreneurs, you're business owners, ExitGuide, ExitGuide.com. The company name is ExitGuide.
That's right.
And at ExitGuide.com, they help small business owners. We were talking before we started filming, and it's such a great niche for what you're doing. There's a lot of small business owners that I guess if they're under a certain amount of value,
that's right, about 5 million, yeah,
under 5 million, that the market of M&A or private equity, or you can correct me as we get into it,
sure,
doesn't really service.
That's right, yeah.
And they know how to start a business, grow a business, but when it comes time to like sell a business or exit, a lot of people are completely clueless as to what do I need to get in order. What is the value? How do I even come up with that? What's the process look like? What should I expect? And so from what I understand, somebody can go to exitguide.com and there's a fee that they could pay, like going to LegalZoom to help them start a company. They can go to your website and they can get help on what's this exit going to look like.
That is right. We help them build an exit plan and then manage the transaction, and it's all online for them. So we've tried to make it very user-friendly so anyone can do it.
That's awesome. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this. For those of you guys that are entrepreneurs, you're building your business, this may be something down the road that can help you, or as you're building your business, you can take some of these concepts into play, into consideration to build a better business one day. So when that exit does come, if you decide to do that, I'm sure some people pass on their businesses to kids and whatnot, but if you decide to exit, that you have a better exit. So with that being said, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me, George.
So catch us up for the audience who doesn't know your story. How did you get to this position of building a software company to help small business owners exit their business? Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of a culmination of an experience. So I've been an entrepreneur. I mean, I started selling T-shirts in college, door to door, and used that money to buy a car. And so it's always been something that I didn't start out saying I want to be an entrepreneur. It just was, I just would do stuff. And so started a little company in Dallas, Texas about 20 plus years ago, which was started by a guy named Mark Cuban, became broadcast.com. And that really gave me a flavor for what a tech startup was like. Now, probably spoiled me a little bit, being so early in my career. But through that, we moved around. I ended up in Silicon Valley, and about 18 years, I grew into various roles with venture-backed startups. So I did a couple turns as CEO, COO. Look, they're not all glamorous. I mean, the broadcast.coms and the other exits, those are exceptions to the rule. And so when you see really what happens is, not all companies make it. But look, every business has a beginning and an end for the owner. And so, 100% of business owners will exit. Now, it may be that someone else steps into their shoes and the business goes on, but as the saying goes, Father Time remains undefeated. And so toward the kind of point in my career where I had helped with a lot of these transactions, I realized that, the tech space has its own set of dynamics, and that there was a huge underserved market for small Main Street business owners. Real people, real businesses, real value. These are the trucks you see driving around. These are the stores you visit. These are the people that you engage in your local community, generally involved in Chamber of Commerce. And where they are is busy running their business and their lives. And this eventual transaction that they're going to have to experience is opaque, and oftentimes accessing people who are service providers is just simply out of reach. And so, a lawyer, an M&A advisor, a business broker, and understandably, they tend to focus on bigger deals. And so businesses that are worth $5, $10, $15, $20 million, and with baby boomers aging out of these businesses, they have plenty of opportunity in front of them. So when we set out, we wanted to solve for two things. One is we wanted to kind of democratize this process. We wanted to kind of take away the mystery of what it means to prepare a business and actually get a transaction done. And the other is, we wanted to kind of help educate small business owners that there are a lot of things that they can do for themselves if we make it available to them through an online service. So, this came from seeing transactions in the tech space and having access to all sorts of experts, but then realizing, well, there's a lot of great people with great businesses that are out there that are going to have to do some of this or all of it on their own. So how can you help them? And when you look at how tech has influenced filing your taxes, forming a business, booking a trip, and doing all sorts of other things. We are very capable as consumers of doing a lot of things with a good product online. So we've kind of tried to bring that almost consumer-like experience to this process of getting your business ready to sell it and then bringing it to market and eventually getting a deal done.
And what does the process look like when somebody is at a point of considering potentially selling their business?
Well, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. Certainly, what is the business worth is generally at the top of everyone's list. That is important, but there's a lot of other things. So there's a couple of things we tend to take a look at, which, so we give people what's known as a sale readiness score.
Okay.
Think of it kind of like your FICO score.
Okay.
You come to the website and it's where you start. When we'll ask you questions that are kind of from the playbook of what an M&A advisor who would sit down with a client and ask. It's not exhaustive, but it's enough to say, okay, how ready are you and the business to actually engage a prospective buyer? Because out of the gate, the buyer's going to certainly want to know what it's worth, but they're going to have a whole host of other questions. So we're focusing on some things around owner dependency. How involved are you in the day-to-day business? And is that involvement because you just love it and you want to be involved? Or is it reliant on you for vendor relationships, customer relationships, and really to make the wheels turn? If it's a good business, you want to know that a new owner could step in or someone could buy the business and install someone to replace you and not see the business kind of, go downhill. The other, tends to be around how profitable is the business and is it scaling and is it growing? Those are kind of the two big things around owner dependency and is this a business that is scalable? People don't buy potential. That tends to happen in the early stage tech where people are buying forward-looking opportunity. When they're looking at traditional Main Street businesses, they want to know that there's a profitable revenue line that they can scale up to. So you got to think about your business as objectively as you can, and your role in it as objectively you can when you first kind of start to get your head around all this.
So the two main areas that you help this person that's going to your site to use your software is to figure out, does the business need me to run?
That's right.
And is it profitable?
Is it profitable? And then there's, okay, well, what happens if, I talk to George and he says, I'm interested in your business. Okay, what documents do you need? What information do you need to provide? What to expect. So when someone comes in, they get their sale readiness score, and then they can purchase an exit plan, and that gives them access to a dashboard, and that dashboard guides them through, okay, if you're trying to sell to an employee, it might look a little bit differently than if you were trying to go find a buyer in your local community. So we've got everything there in a kind of easy to use layout so that you can come in and say, okay, I understand I need to create a bit of a narrative to tell the story of my business if I'm going to explain this and get the attention of potential buyers. And if they then kind of ask, I'm ready for that process known as due diligence, and I've got all the information ready, so I'm not, caught blind. I'm not blindsided by, these requests that are going to come from a buyer. So our goal is that we're going to take that sale readiness score from, maybe 650 to, above 700, and give that business owner confidence of, okay, I don't know if I'm going to necessarily sell it today, but I know that I'm ready and I've increased the odds so that when they do engage somebody, the likelihood of a transaction actually closing increases.
And do you guys actually, once they're at a point where their sale readiness score is high, do you guys actually help them find buyers, or it's more so we help you package this offer and then we connect you to the marketplace, or that's up to you at that point?
Well, there's kind of where my business is, which is we're a startup, and so today it's more on that packaging.
Okay.
We have people who are ready to come in and partner. We are putting some partnerships in place with marketplaces because they're all looking for inventory. What's different though is if you go on to sites like Biz, Buy, Sell, and others, anyone can put a posting up there. It costs you like $1,000, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you talk to buyers and people who are on those websites, the biggest complaint they have is, well, I get all sorts of garbage businesses that are not ready. I ask them questions. They don't get back to me. So where our customers are going to be different when they start to enter that marketplace is you as a buyer is going to come in and you're going to look at a business and you're going to say, okay, actually now I know that they actually have a valuation that's been performed. They have all their information ready to go, like financial reports, tax returns, and other things. And so, the likelihood of a transaction, is more likely because that buyer's coming in knowing that you as the seller have actually done some of this work And so it gives the buyer confidence that they've got somebody who's ready to go and prepared, and they're not going to spin their wheels, wasting a lot of time asking for information or finding out that the business is, worth far less than what the owner thinks.
Okay. And so when you're dealing with a small business owner, oftentimes I would assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume that small business owner is pivotal to the business and they're doing a lot of the work. Do you see that in that smaller sub 5 million market?
We do, but there are ways to work your way out of that.
Okay.
And so, if you have if you're a solo entrepreneur and it's a service-based business, it's going to be tough. You have a customer list, but the challenge is, even though you may have a great business, people may say, I'm used to dealing with George to file my tax returns or to perform this certain service. So someone else could come in, but if I've been working with you as a trusted service provider for 5, 10, 15 years, it becomes very difficult. Now, if you have a business that may have several employees and there's some form of structure and systems in place, now you can start to maybe tighten those up and put other people in or give more responsibility to other employees that will create more of a ownership within the structure of the business itself and put less of a dependency on the owner. So, some of it is being honest with yourself as an owner, and then some of it may be getting some support and assistance with putting some structure and systems in place. And that could take, sometimes it could take as little as a couple of months. Sometimes it might actually take you a couple of years, which is why we really encourage people to think about this in advance.
And that was going to be my next question. How far in advance should somebody start considering the process, the questions,
Sure.
the preparation before they're looking to potentially exit?
Look, the academic answer is, when you start your business. Right. Eventually,
Okay.
you're going to exit it. Now,
Okay.
that isn't necessarily practical. People have lives. They get caught up in, making the business work and run, and we've got challenges with that. So, I would like to see, practically speaking, at least a year in advance, because what you want to understand is, okay, if you have this expectation, let's just pick $2 million, that your business is worth $2 million. Well, if it isn't, then do you have enough time to start to work on the business, to put things in place, help increase profit margins, so on and so forth? Or are you able to adjust your expectations to what the market will bear? So you want to give yourself enough time to kind of take your expectations and map it to reality, and then find out where the gap is and what do you need to put in place, both in terms of the tactical items as well as emotionally and mentally get prepared for a transaction that is going to really map to what the market will bear.
But that's a great point, though, that you said, because you should start thinking about selling your business from the moment that you start it, because you're then building a business that becomes, even if you don't plan on it, you're building a business that also can survive without you.
That is, and the way you said it is perfect, which is you really want to have the owner divorced from the business when someone's taking a look at it. And you can go on Twitter and see people who talk about these boring businesses that don't take much to run. My experience is that running any business is hard work. Now maybe you're no longer doing the labor if you own a landscape company or a manufacturing company, but to make sure everybody's aligned. So running a business is still hard work. But you do need to start thinking about what is your role and how do you empower the people around you so that they're buying a business, not something that the owner and they're just replacing the owner as a full-time job that's 40, 50, 60 hours a week.
Does the company, in terms of giving people guidance, does it help that person through the process of transitioning from owner-operator to helping them start to develop some managers, some systems, some technology? Like, is there guidance in that?
We do, but up to a point. So we also have a different way of approaching this. So ExitGuide.com is direct to consumer. People can come on and do a DIY, and we provide email support. We've also rolled out ExitGuide for advisors, and that allows somebody who may be a financial advisor or even a business broker or a CPA who is generally going to be more hands-on and maybe have some working knowledge of the business to use the platform to provide the structure, but then they're also going to be there to provide that advice and more of that hand-holding. So what we found is, there's plenty of people who at least want to start the process of creating an exit plan online. Some of them actually need more hand-holding. And the market has plenty of people that are out there that are, professional service providers with a working knowledge that can provide more of that handholding. And so they use us as a platform, as a professional service provider, to work with that business owner.
Okay. And are there 2-3 things that you could just share with a business owner that's watching this that says, hey, I'm kind of running my business as I'm preparing for that, or I want to build it to where at one point I have the option to exit? Are there 2-3 things that person should do that are common procedures that they should be getting ready to do?
Yes. One, get your financial, reports and bookkeeping in order. A lot of times the things that are in your head about the way things are categorized, or whatever it may be, if you can, engage a professional bookkeeper or somebody who can make sure that everything is good. Because garbage in, garbage out. When the time comes to actually hand over P&L statements or generate a valuation, if things aren't categorized properly or profits are not necessarily captured in a way that is, generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP principles, it's going to be really, really tough. You're almost shooting yourself in the foot before you get out of the gate. So one, clean financial records, make sure everything is categorized correctly. If you can, have a bookkeeper, look at things and make sure everything is in order.
Is a standard bookkeeper and CPA, like my CPA has a bookkeeper, it's a small organization. Is that sufficient, or does somebody need to go to like a larger accounting
organization? Use a bookkeeper. And that's where I like to use the term, democratizing this process. Having lived through this, if you run a small business that's generating maybe $500,000 to $2 to $3 million a year, you don't need a sophisticated banking team to go do a whole bunch of analysis and different types of more advanced calculations on your valuation. This can be a fairly straightforward transaction. 45% of the time, a business owner is actually selling to someone that they know, an employee, family member, business partner, someone in their community. So, there's some basic steps that need to be taken, but a standard bookkeeper who's, trained and a professional bookkeeper, really you just want to make sure that, cost of goods sold, your operating expenses, your profit margins, that those reports, which oftentimes are going to come out of a platform like QuickBooks, are accurate. And a good bookkeeper should be able to do that.
Okay, so one, you were saying get your finances in order.
Get your finances in order. Two, do you have documentation in place about employees, contracts, business procedures, agreements? So, if you don't, then try to get them in place. And again, sometimes people start a business, it catches momentum, but they don't put a contract in place maybe with their biggest customer. And sure, you've done this on a handshake for maybe a couple of years, but that isn't necessarily going to work. That creates some risk from a buyer's perspective. So get your financials in order. Two, make sure you have documentation, like who are your employees? Do you have employee agreements? Do you have vendor agreements that talk about, the terms and conditions and leases? No one wants to buy a retail business when they find out there's 6 months left on a lease and, it's unknown if they're going to renew. So all those contracts, those systems, go through, and where you can, put contracts in place, get documentation around how things work. Try to get as much of that information out of your head and onto paper. And it takes several hours to do this, but the reality is no one's probably going to go sit down and do that in one sitting.
Sure.
So doing these things oftentimes can take weeks and months, which is why we do this as more of an online service. So we're showing you those things that you need. And so you don't have to, we're not going to send you a list that you're going to lose in your email inbox. It's all laid out in a dashboard. It says, okay, you need to have a narrative around, describing your company and the opportunity. You need to upload your formation documents. So all those little details that, stresses people out. They don't know about them. So those are the two big things: is get your financials in order, get your documentation and your business process, so that it's readily available. Now you probably have something that can start to be packaged up.
Got it. Do you guys have like a percentage completion? Like
we do. Great question. Yes, we do.
Yeah, because I know when I'm on, yes. we were doing we were using Rocket Lawyer the other day to do something with an LLC. And, it's showing you what percentage.
That's right.
Going through the steps. And depending on if you answer yes, then it prompts this.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah. Look, having grown up in the world of tech, there's certain ways of just presenting information to people who are using your site or your service. And, it may sound kind of trivial, but these are well-tested things by a lot of smart people who've understood how consumers behave and interact with products. So we bring that. My co-founders, and I, we all have, decades of experience. And how do you make it easy so someone who may run a small business knows that they're actually doing the right things? So we have tools. I like to say we've kind of created this workflow that's online. Really what we're selling is confidence.
Yeah.
I want that business owner to,
that's powerful,
close that laptop or get off their phone and be like, I had no idea and I was terrified as to whether I could even do this, but I spent an hour on a Saturday and I've gotten some stuff in order. I know some things I need to get to next weekend, but it's going to be okay.
That's probably really good service for just somebody who wants to professionalize their business too.
Yeah, it can be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a retirement plan. Like, you have this end game in mind. No one walks into, well, hopefully you don't, a financial advisor's office says, I'm going to retire next year. What do I need to do?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is beneficial to think about this in the long term and say, okay, here's where I am today. My goal is to be here. How do I go through that process?
Yeah, in the life insurance industry, everything we do is a contract, obviously, with a carrier. But for like the guy that runs our landscaping company, there's no contract. The pool company, there's no contract.
Yeah.
Certain things like that, and those are things that are going to take time for a person to be able to put together. So I could see that process of it taking.
It is, and it doesn't have to be a contract per se, but even if it's some form of digitized CRM of your customer base, and you've got some type of loyalty program or other ways of at least knowing that there's a customer retention. What tends to be a real challenge for business owners is when everything is just kind of come as you go and there's nothing in place to document anything, then really it's a source of income that generates, it's a job that generates income. But a business has to have something that's, kind of got documentation, process, and procedures in place. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, I hate to get wrapped up around, procedures and documentation. We like to break rules and build things. But even your pool guy, like, even if he just had a customer list and billing systems and everything in place that someone could step in the next day and kind of understand everything about the business, that's where you want to be.
Got it. And then in terms of like the first question, how much is my business worth?
Yeah.
Right. How does somebody even put a number to what their business is worth?
Okay. So there's different ways. So the way that a lot of us know about is the publicly traded market. There's a, IPO, or you've had a market, and the market dictates, what the business is worth, and they're looking at financials and, how profitable is the business, what's your earnings per share and all that other stuff. This isn't that. On the very small end for a Main Street business, there's different ways, but really what you're looking for is what is the cash flow of the business. So if I come in and I buy this business, how much can I expect to take home? And there's different ways of doing that, but really the two most common, one is called a seller's discretionary earnings, which really takes into account the full payment to the business owner. So I've got my salary, and all of this is perfectly legitimate and legal, but most small business owners run expenses through their business. So there may be a gym membership, there may be car leases, a family member may be on the payroll, and maybe they do a little bit of work, but they're not necessarily a full-time employee. So you're looking at the total compensation for that business owner, and then when you file your tax return, there's a little thing in there that says, what's your business code? And that is known as an NAICS code. Please don't, I can't remember, North American something. People watching this can open another tab and Google it if they like. But that code basically says, okay, this is the type of business it is. So when you're looking at a market-based or a seller's discretionary earnings, you're taking the kind of potential or the current cash flow of that business, and you're applying a multiple based on that NAICS code. So it says, okay, other bakeries that have tried to sell, that have sold in the past 3-5 years, here's what they've sold for, and that is looked at as a multiple applied to, total revenue. It's applied to EBITDA, and it can be applied to EBIT. So you take a look at those, and it says, okay, now we start to kind of say, okay, similar businesses generating this amount of cash flow, we apply this multiple, and that will get you to what your valuation is.
Is there somewhere somebody can go look to see what their multiple is for their industry?
You can. It's a little bit confusing without having somebody from a professional standpoint, because there's tens of thousands of NAICS codes, and so you are relying on your ability to interpret that. And then, where you're getting that multiple from can vary wildly. So, we have a system that allows us to kind of do that in an automated fashion. And then, in some cases we do bring in a professional. So you can look at it, but I would use that as a general approximation and definitely not as a take home.
Is there a common multiplier in the business world when you sell a business? Like it's 2x, 3x, 5x?
We have such a big economy and diversified. It's really hard to compare a service-based industry to a retail industry to a manufacturing. So there's a lot of factors. So, 1x revenue might be, a number, but it's really not to your advantage to try to kind of generalize it too much.
Okay. What are the biggest myths that you would see that entrepreneurs have when it comes to selling their business?
Well, one is that it's going to sell easily. It's going to take work. And look, even if you have a good business, you want to make sure that you're getting the right value for it. This will take work. The analogy I use is no one wakes up on a Saturday morning and says, let's sell our house and throws a sign in the front yard. I mean, what do? You go in, you take a look at, what other houses in your neighborhood have sold for. And did the price they sold for match the asking price? Did you go around, clean up some things and, maybe, touch up the paint, make some repairs? There's work to be done before you sell your house, right? And people get that. And in some cases, they may engage an agent. Selling your business is almost the same. You need to start thinking about this and say, okay, let me take an objective look at my business as much as possible. Now that I understand what it's worth, what are the things that I need to do to kind of put it in place? So really, it's kind of about getting that preparation. So, this isn't just throwing a listing up there and people magically walk in the door. So the biggest myth is, well, when I'm ready to sell, I'll just start telling people about it. You need to do work. The other is...
So number one, you said that it will sell.
Yeah, that will sell with very little work.
Okay, got it.
Two, is 80% of these deals actually, 80% of the businesses that go to market actually don't sell.
And why?
Well, our data in a lot of the market is simply because owners aren't prepared. So, sometimes health conditions or other factors force you into a situation where you need to sell your business and you just simply can't in the time frame. But a lot of it has to do with these other things that we're trying to mitigate. So it's having that preparation. So, one is the expectation that it's going to easily sell, and two, that it actually is even going to sell at all without any level of preparation. So a lot of this work that you're going to do in advance is going to increase the odds. The third that I think is often overlooked is really that emotional toll that it takes. So I don't think people give enough attention to it. I wouldn't call it a myth, but I would call it a kind of a forgotten element of this. If you've invested your heart and soul in building a business, when that time comes and that buyer's getting pretty serious, this is a big transaction. This is akin to having kids, moving into your first home, getting married. I mean, this is big. And, this isn't necessarily, it's not a $200 million transaction, but this is big enough that, it's a big part of your life. So you got to prepare for that and start thinking about, like, what's the thing that you want to go do next, in your life. And that should be something you give some consideration to before you actually start to go down this path.
Is there any part of that service that you guys offer that helps people identify those things? Is it like a survey or a question, or that's...
We refer people. I mean, there's that need is kind of hard to really productize from a technology standpoint.
Yeah.
But, somebody who's a big believer in therapy and, dealing with the emotional aspect of it, we've got people that we refer, some owners to. And they're pleasantly surprised when I ask about it, if they're paying for our program and they're getting coaching, that, they'll say, like, yeah, I really didn't think about that. What do I do? I'm like, well, I got 2 or 3 people that we can send you to. And we get emails back where they're like, it's really helpful to have worked with them to really think about this because I've been doing this for 20 years.
These are people that help an entrepreneur start thinking about what their life looks like after their business.
That's right. Yeah.
Is it a therapist? Is it a counselor? Is it a strategic coach?
It could be any of those. Some of them are more holistic, people on the holistic medicine. Some are therapists. A few are coaches, but my comfort level in terms of referring, I'd like somebody to have some level of certification.
Got it.
with that, just because you don't know what you're going to uncover. It's not our business, but I prefer to have somebody who's, when we refer somebody, I prefer to have some form of training and licensing to deal with it.
Understood.
Yeah.
And that may tie into the next question, and we've kind of talked about these two, so it may be the same answer. In terms of mistakes that you've seen people make when selling a business, is there any other things outside of what we've spoken about? That
it's just waiting to the last minute and doing it. I mean, it is. When people do that, I say that is like walking into your advisor's office and being like, all right, I want to retire next year. Like, what do I do? I mean, yes, things can be done, but it's just such a suboptimal plan. So, no, I think prepare. And if you're preparing for success, and it'll build your confidence, and you'll have much better understanding. So that's kind of the mistake to avoid is don't procrastinate and don't wing it.
Okay. And do you guys, with the data, I don't know if you guys ask these questions or not, or just from your experience, the reasons that you see people selling their business, like what are all the different reasons that a person would sell their business?
Yeah. What's interesting is about, not quite half has to deal with, wanting to retire. There's actually a healthy percent, probably 15 to 20%. They're just simply looking to do something else. And like my interpretation of that is people are living longer, and they're living longer, healthier, more productive lives. And sometimes people just run out of gas for that business, and it's just a different season in life where they're not looking to retire and sit by the lake and play golf. They want to actually, be productive, but they don't want to keep doing this business anymore. And so, when you look at the people who retire versus the people who, actually just want to move on to something else, that takes it to close to 70%.
Okay.
There are probably another 15% or so where there's challenges. Sometimes it's with a business partner. Sometimes it's broader, economic conditions. If the business is failing, it's going to be next to impossible to sell, but there's still an exit option. You can sell the assets and use that to kind of still shut down the business, maybe with some cash. So selling the business or exiting the business doesn't always mean selling it to someone you don't know yet.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's the climate that we're in right now with, high interest rates, the cost to borrow money. Have you seen less people buying, less institutions or individuals or investment firms buying businesses?
Most of these deals, when you're looking at this end of the market, that kind of $500,000 to $2.5–3 million, over 80% of these deals are seller financed. So you can get an SBA loan. It's possible, and rates will impact a little bit.
You said seller financed.
Yeah, and I'll explain what that is. So seller financing means, let's just again go back to, my carpet cleaning business. I'm going to sell it to you. We've assigned a value of $550,000 is what you're going to pay for it. Now, if you're buying that kind of business, chances are you don't have $550,000 burning a hole in your pocket. So you have a couple different options. One is you can go to an SBA, and there's banks and SBA lender, brokers that will go out and they will help you. But in a majority of cases, you and I will come up with an attachment to our purchase agreement, the business purchase agreement, that says, okay, you're going to pay me back over 5 years from proceeds generated from the business at this interest rate. And so, the benefit to you is you don't have to come up with $500,000 on the spot. You don't have to go through an institution to get an SBA loan, but you are going to maybe make less money. Now, your incentive obviously is to grow the business so that your take-home pay is, where you need it to be. Me as the business owner, I'm getting paid, from proceeds from the business, so I'm incentivized to make sure that transition is fairly smooth. That is actually the most common way small business transactions under $5 million are actually handled.
That's interesting. So I understand seller financing from like the real estate position in terms of you're buying, say you're buying 25, 50 acres, and there's a small, lump sum. And then from there, it's at a certain interest rate for a certain amount of time. So the risk would be if I'm selling that business, I would assume there's risk there.
Yeah.
Of I'm selling it to you, I'm getting paid from the profits. If you don't do a good job, I'm not getting paid what I thought I was selling my business for.
That's right. And so that's where a not just a level of trust, but there needs to be some structure and a plan in place. So if you're selling that business, you want to make sure that you are able to, see that transition happen smoothly. but that you want to get paid in years 3, 4, and 5 on the term. And so, that may involve you being maybe pretty involved in the first couple of months, in terms of handing that business over. But you also want to make sure that if you can collateralize it, it's great. In some cases, it can't happen. And that's where you're just going to have some give and take. So back to what I said earlier, where one of the myths is that the business is just going to sell easily. 50% of deals fall apart in due diligence. And then the deal gets done, but the money hasn't necessarily totally transitioned over. And so, having a contract in place that addresses what happens if you can't pay is important. And there is going to be some risk on both sides to make sure that, that can be, put in place.
And who would draft that? Some type of business lawyer?
Yeah, you want to have a small business attorney that has, experience with M&A.
Okay.
And again, those when you buy an exit plan from us, part of what we'll do is refer you to people that we have vetted. So in some cases, people come in and they say, "Look, I already have a business lawyer, I already have a CPA. I just need to understand how to do some of this transaction." In other cases, we'll say, "Great, these are people that we vetted. They will help you with maybe it's cleaning up your books, maybe it's a business attorney who does these transactions day in and day out."
And if a seller's going to get paid from business profits and it's going to take that amount of time anyways for them to collect their return, hey, over the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years,
yeah,
what's the benefit of them selling the business? That they just have to do less work over that time frame, even if they're generating the same cash flow over the same amount of time?
From the seller's perspective?
From this, yes.
Yeah, from the seller's perspective, hopefully, that involvement goes down considerably. If it's taking a 2 to 3 year transition, then I would raise an eyebrow at that. It generally you're looking at weeks or months. The goal is to get this new owner to stand up and run the business. And so you want to be helpful, but you don't want to necessarily create a dependency or a blocker that they're not really able to take the reins because you're involved. So you want to get out, right? It's in some ways is those of us who've consulted with companies, have done a lot of work as a fractional exec. What you want to get to is you want your client to no longer need you if that's how you've
done a lot of work as a what?
Fractional exec, fractional
Okay.
COO, fractional CEO.
Okay. And that means what?
It means back in my tech days, I've gone in where early stage companies can't afford a full-time CFO or chief operating officer. So they'll hire someone like myself who has considerable experience, and I can come in and act in that role 1 or 2 days a week without having to take the full W-2 salary.
Understood.
Yeah.
And do you see that most small businesses are selling to other businesses that are in that same industry as them, same space? Or
it's a mix. We see a lot of interest from employees.
Okay.
The passing a business down to a family member, one generation is about 20%. Less than 8% actually make it to that second generation.
Wow. So that's great information. So 20% of businesses roughly pass on to
Generation 1. Yeah.
And then it drops to 8%.
Less than 8%, just under 8% when you get to Generation 2. And, that's the age we live in is, people start a business, maybe they, raise their kids go off, they now live hundreds or thousands of miles away, and, they're just have their own life or their own career path. So with the mobility of our society, these family businesses, are just, it's a struggle to get people to come back to their community, just how transient we are. And look, there's some cases, I'll never forget, we had a customer that was a business, there was a restaurant in the Gulf part of Texas. And one of the first things he said to me, which was so striking, he said, "We raised our kids not to be in the restaurant business." And so sometimes I've seen business owners where they don't want their kids to be in a business because maybe they want different things for their kids.
Sure.
So it really is it's an interesting dynamic when you look at a family business as to what's going to happen once the original owner, retires or moves out.
And you said that time frame from them taking over that business, that typical involvement is a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks.
No, look, I generally speaking, I would want to see, if I were the buyer, I would want to see that owner committed to at least 3 months. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be there full time. They can maybe work, but I would want them available on call and maybe coming in and handing off relationships. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that's just really hard to document. Maybe it's the personality of a particular employee and how to manage him or her. Maybe it's a certain customer that, pays late, but you've always expected it. There's just these things that, are really hard to capture. And then once you're in the day-to-day, so I'd like to see at least 90 days.
Okay.
And then it can titrate down. So you can say, all right, you're here 2 days a week, you're doing this. And then after that, there's, please make sure you're responding to emails and phone calls. Eventually that would move out, say after about 6 months is reasonable. But again, if you're the seller and this is seller financing, year may go by. And if there's a sticky situation, you're probably going to be glad to pick up the phone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And do you guys, on the flip side of helping a person exit, do you guys do anything on helping a person enter? Like if I'm buying a business?
Not yet. I do some of these calls because I get, people who know what I do and know about the company. There's a lot we want to go do. We're still a relatively early stage startup.
Okay.
So, people say like, have you thought about doing this and this and this? And I guess my founder answer is always, give me a couple $1 million, we can do all that and more. But so there's more things we would like to go and do and build. But right now we're focused strictly on kind of helping the seller.
Okay. Are most people that buying businesses, from your experience, is it also their first time buying a business, or most?
It seems to be now, and I think this is awesome and refreshing. I'm seeing, millennials especially, really waking up to the opportunity of taking some of these traditional businesses. Now, there is I'd like to find a aging out business owner who hasn't modernized the business and buy it and grow it and do it. I think those days have passed. The market is much wiser. So if you have a plumbing business that is turning over $3 million a year and profitable and got a great reputation, has been around for 20 years, you're getting calls from PE firms and prospective business buyers all day, every day. So the secret's out. So there's a lot of interest in younger generations actually buying these businesses, which is awesome. If you're going to do this, just be prepared and make sure you have focus and a thesis as to where, what you want to buy and how you're going to pay for it before you start calling people up.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then to people that are selling their business and they get to the valuation stage and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a lot more.
Sure.
Is there any process that you guys do or anything you would advise that entrepreneur, that business owner to go do?
Well, you have a couple of options. And when I started, I felt very strongly about this, which is, we want to be there for the entire journey. And your expectation to maybe find a buyer and get this certain number, if we can't help you meet that, we still want to be able to afford you the options. And so options are, you can work on the business. Now, if you find out the business is worth $400,000, you want $4 million for it, you're going to be in for a long haul, and that may not necessarily be a realistic outcome. So you got to, at that point, make the decision. Do I want to double down and work, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to increase the value of my business? Or do I want to sell it for what it's worth? Or should I look at simply selling the assets and dissolving the business? All these are viable options, but you kind of have to look at this as both a business decision as well as a life decision. If you're done and you have no more gas in the tank to run this business, the ability to double or triple the valuation is probably relatively low. So you got to be honest with yourself as to what you have in terms of time, energy, and commitment, and maybe even capital to kind of make a substantial change to the business.
You said double down, change your expectation to reality.
Yeah.
Or sell the assets.
You
and
can
close
sell
the
the
business
assets
down.
and dissolve the business.
Got it. And then from kind of last couple questions, any general advice to somebody that's maybe not there, but they want to grow their business? Any general advice from you being, a CEO, a COO, now being
Sure.
part of many startups? I'm not at the phase of even thinking about it. I actually want to grow my business now.
Yeah.
What advice do you give to newer entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs at any level?
Well, look, make sure you're building a business and not a product. And that really applies a little bit more to tech. You get people who have technical skills and they want to go build something and they think it's cool. And the reality is no one cares that you can build something, right? If you put a house in the middle of nowhere and be like, it's an awesome house. And people are like, well, yeah, but I mean, like, there's no store. I mean, I can't, like, you know, I gotta have access. There's gonna be more than just the house itself. So, you know, make sure you're building a business and not just tickling a niche or building a product. But the rest is, you know, you do have to think about the business separate from yourself. So as you're looking at this with a longer horizon, you eventually will exit it. You know, are you building something that is so dependent on you and what's in your head and you being present, or are you building a business that stands alone and is its own separate entity? So, you know, build a business, bring people in. Hopefully you're hiring people that are smarter than you, willing to work hard, and are loyal to the business and the customers and the suppliers. So think about the business is not you, and don't get so enmeshed in it, both in terms of your time commitment and your role, as well as emotionally. You eventually do need to step away from it. So it's a hard thing to do. It's much easier to dispense this advice than to follow it. I get it, been there, but it is going to, in the long run, going to help you.
And what's been the biggest difference from being a CEO, COO, to now being a startup owner?
You know, it's a great question. I mean, I've always been in early stage tech. I think the difference, you know, and I'd come into companies with as little as, you know, 3 or 4 employees to, you know, a few hundred. It is exhausting to take something from, I have an idea. I mean, when I started ExitGuide, people would ask, well, is it this, is it that? Because we as humans tend to anchor against something that we know.
Sure.
Which is why I tell people, like, think about LegalZoom. Well, I had the chance to talk to one of the co-founders of LegalZoom. And, you know, he had great advice, you know, about, you know, building and running the business. But when you're doing something that doesn't exist, you know, it's exhausting to go from something that's in your head to something that people use. And there's an absolute rush. It's an adrenaline rush to say, this was in my head. I put it down in slides, and then somebody built it, and then we changed it. And then a credit card transaction goes through and somebody's happy. You know, it's different when you're taking someone else's vision and trying to build it and scale it up. You're still wanting to work hard, and there's different challenges and nuances. But I get it. When you take something from idea to, I don't want to say on paper, but on screen, and people are using it, yeah, there is an emotional attachment. I got to follow my own advice, not become too emotionally attached to the business. Yeah.
And so was there fear of leaving this executive role, making great money?
No, I wasn't early stage tech. I wasn't. This was not like the Hollywood.
Okay.
Yeah. These are all gritty startup. I mean, you're always. I mean, like in some cases, you know, you're not making a pittance, but you're making okay money. If I had wanted to maximize for salary, I would have, you know, probably gone into. I probably should have, you know, gone to work at Facebook at this stage of my career, or some other big company with security. I've always been in the early stage stuff where my wife of nearly 30 years has been very patient with the phrase of, look, in 90 days, we're going to know whether this is going to work or whether it's going to hit a wall. We've been running on that for decades now.
Why does that attract? What about that
I
calls
don't
you?
know, George. It's you know, when I see it with younger entrepreneurs and they start talking about it, I can tell that they don't realize that they have this affliction yet. And so I you know, generally say, like, I'm sorry, but like, you're gonna quit this job at Google or whatever it is. You just see it. I think it's. I was talking to a franchise consultant just yesterday. And he said something to me, which I've identified at this stage. I'm in my 50s. I mean, I've identified this about myself, which he said, yeah, guys like you are he's a franchise consultant. He said, guys like you are terrible. And I say, I've always said that to other people. Like, I could screw up a McDonald's franchise. Like, they'd come down and be like, we have tens of thousands of these around the world. Like, how did you mess this up? And be like, baby, our tikka masala fries are off the hook. And they'd be like, you just throw out the playbook. So I think there's a natural, innate thing of wanting to build something from scratch versus follow a recipe. You know, I'm sure people much smarter than me have studied this, but it's what I do, and I've grown to accept it.
Did you grow up that way with your parents? Were they entrepreneurs?
No. Midwest, very traditional. My dad worked at the same company for 30 years. I I don't know how it happened. It could have been, like I said, I started selling T-shirts in college. I borrowed $500 from my dad, paid him back, and started selling T-shirts. And that may have been, I don't know what it is. That may have been the spark. It may have been, being an early employee at broadcast.com. But seeing something go from nothing or a scrappy group of people trying to make something work that doesn't exist, and most of the time it doesn't work out. So yes, I was a CEO, but when you're a CEO of a company that doesn't, meet its goals, it's a hard thing to do.
Do you take that failure like personal, and did that?
Yeah, you do. I mean, it is a fractional exec, and I was dealing with some turnarounds in the Valley before I left. That I couldn't sustain it, to be honest with you. I was getting brought in by top flight VC firms into sticky situations, and just from I've said this many times, at a soul level and just who I am as a person, I couldn't do it, and I was becoming good at something I didn't want to pursue.
That's powerful.
And it's why there's the business reason for starting ExitGuide is it's a huge multi-trillion-dollar underserved market that can only be empowered by technology. I'm well suited for that. I know how to go do that. The sole reason for doing this is I have a frustration, chip on my shoulder, whatever you want to call it, is that if you run a traditional Main Street business and you want to exit it and it's worth a couple of $100,000 or a few $1 million, you do not have access to the help that you need and the information you need. And having been around businesses that were not always great ideas, or people who had just, seen money flow through their hands and tens of millions of dollars go down the drain and going in and fixing those, you're like, well, these people will all survive and go on to fight another day. But if you're running a retail business with 4 employees, you don't have a neighbor or a buddy who's head of M&A at a bank or something like that's going to walk you through. You need help. And so I want to correct that.
What was the last few questions? What was the hardest part of starting ExitGuide? You have this idea, you discover it, hey, wow, this is something I could do.
Yeah. I think the hardest part of starting any business, quite frankly, is the loneliness, the isolation, and the ability to motivate yourself. Like if you wake up every day, especially if it's because you have to create inertia in the momentum. And so if I wanted to open up a pizza place in Lakeway where I live, no one's going to ask me, well, do people like pizza? Of course they do. Now, there's a whole set of issues that I have to face. Is it good? Can I get customers? All these other things. But when you start something that doesn't exist, you may be working on something that nobody wants or needs or is willing to pay for. And so that's a very lonely feeling to wake up every day by yourself and trying to create that momentum to build something that you believe the market needs and will pay for, and the emotional toll for that. It's the number one thing. Like, startups are not glamorous. They aren't. People like to watch movies and they think it's all outcome. 99, it's 1% that has the broadcast.com experience that I had. And it was hard. I mean, I banged out 70 cold calls a day, early on, and it fortunately worked out. But for the most part, you're dealing with something that until you're successful, no one cares. And then people all say, I knew it was going to work, right? But it's that loneliness, it's that isolation of trying to build something that you have in your head, but it's not a fully formed idea. And it's the grind, because what I started with, a couple of years ago and where it is today, it's directionally close, but in terms of the product on the page and what people experience, it's not the same thing. It took a lot of cuts and scrapes and bruises to get there.
And what advice would you give to somebody going through that loneliness, that isolation? What helped you go through it? Or how did you lead yourself through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit different for everyone. So I think for me, it's been a couple of things. One is you have to be irrational to be a startup entrepreneur.
Irrational.
Yeah, you just have to be irrational. You have to just when someone says, there's gravity, you have to have something in your mind that says, well, not all the time. And so you have to have some level of insanity. But what will help you is, one, I think you need to find some outlet of people that understand what you're going through. So whether it's other founders, sometimes as an investor, investors aren't always the good soundboard. You've got to find somebody that you can just some days call up or go get a coffee or a beer with and just say, I'm done. I'm going to sell mountain bikes. I'm not doing this, right? Like a number of times where I've been like, I'm going to go work at Thundercloud, and like, you're going to roll in and be like, George, I got your turkey sub waiting for you. And be like, I thought you were. And like, no more. So you got to have some support network of other entrepreneurs. For me also, I mean, it's been part of my faith journey. It's an existential question for me, which is, I believe, but I can't prove that this is what God has me doing right now. That's probably a whole separate podcast. But is a friend of mine and I used to joke. I've got a great title for a book, but I don't know what the content would be. But the title would be "God Does Not Text." I wish he did, because then I could be like, "Am I still should be doing like?" And be like, "Yeah." So you've got to find something where you have an outlet of other people that understand what you're going through, and then the other, I think you have to something that's outside of your work that you can lean on, whether it's faith, whether it's family, whether it's community therapy, but you got to have something that will also help you go through this. It's a beating. It's an absolute beating. But when you have those moments of success, whether it's getting a customer win or a product out the door or getting a customer review, whatever it may be, I don't know, you've got young kids. My kids are adults now, but it's like you get to a certain point where you're like, yeah, I forgot about the sleepless nights. And then you have another kid and you're like, oh gosh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. They're up all night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were up last night.
Yeah. You look good though.
Thanks.
Yeah.
My wife does the work.
Okay.
She's an amazing mom and wife. And that's actually my last question. So it tied in well. Your wife supporting this process, because you guys have been married 30 years.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship doesn't just take a beating on the founder or the creator or whatnot.
Yeah.
It takes a beating on the the marriage, the children, because you're investing a lot of time. How's that journey been for you, and what advice could you give to people that are in marriage or one day will be married and go through that process of building a business?
That's actually one of the most important questions that I've ever been asked. I've been done a lot of podcasts, so I love the fact that you asked that. A couple of things. One, entrepreneurship has seasons. There were periods where I went and took a corporate job, and I did it for 1, 2, 3 years. It didn't mean I wasn't an entrepreneur, but it meant that at that point I needed to have something with structure, stability, healthcare benefits, and all that other stuff. And I learned from those jobs, but they weren't necessarily who I am and what I really, really wanted to do. But it was enjoyable work with nice people. So one, being an entrepreneur doesn't mean you have to be an entrepreneur every day, 7 days a week, 12 months out of the year for decades. You may have fits and starts because that's just the practicality of life. The other is, you've got to, when you make these decisions, when I did this, we moved to Austin and I have had to sit down with my wife and I had the benefit of having been a startup CEO and COO before, of knowing what was in store for me and for us. So with age comes a little bit of wisdom. So we had a little bit more knowledge, but there is not a business, there is not a number that is worth sacrificing your family. There just isn't. And if you feel like that's either potentially happening or you're in those depths, the world's got to stop. You got to focus on that. Look, I've been fortunate to have been in this whole internet space from the get-go to where it is today. I've seen people with hundreds of millions of dollars that have an absolutely miserable personal life. And, I've seen grown men who have been in the Wall Street Journal with tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank cry. And you look at that and you're like, look, I mean, not to say I wouldn't want hundreds of millions of dollars to be great, but nothing can replace, money cannot buy that kind of hole in your soul and in your heart, and so don't kid yourself that that's going to be what's going to fill your cup in the long run.
And how do you balance building this company and also having a good marriage?
It's not easy, and it ebbs and flows, so it's not going to be accurate. You're not going to be able to do it every day. You kind of have to look at it as a little bit like an investment. You have to look at it over 3-6 months. but check in regularly, right? How am I doing? How are we doing? Make sure you're carving out time. Look, the work will always be there, especially if you're trying to start. Work will always, always, always be there. Your wife and your kids, or your husband and your kids and other people that are important to you, they may not be. A life verse for me is actually a Yiddish proverb. If you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. And it sounds funny, it is, but when you think about it, you don't necessarily know what's in store the next day. That is a gift that we are given every day. So, having that realization and making sure, whether it's, I'm a very calendar-driven person, so sometimes I will, carve out time and make sure that I don't work past a certain time, or that I'll try to develop routines so that I'm staying committed to that. And look, a big lie is, just yet another 100,000 or another million or whatever it may be is going to make things okay for my family, for my kids. No, it's not. It's not. Like, they don't know what you do, and they don't care. They care that you're home. They care that you are the guy throwing them up in the air in the pool, or taking the walk with them down the street, and walking every 4 feet you're stopping to look at bugs and caterpillars. Your kids will remember that. They're not going to remember that you got that extra deal done or accomplished that next promotion.
That's great advice. We have a lot of couples that work together, and so we try to, make sure, keep your couples nights, your date nights, work out together, spend time together, involve your kids in the business, bring them on trips.
Yep.
So it's a very family-oriented company. Yep. I said that was my last question, but I got to go back to this one because I skipped it. So today, I'm going to get coffee. I was getting coffee earlier, and we had another episode before this one, and I'm like, God, why can't you just tell me? So when you say, why can't God text?
Yeah.
I'm like, I just need you to talk to me. And he was just like, I said, so I'm not going to put the radio on. I'm not going to put a book on. I'm not going to pick up the call. I'm not going to. And then I got distracted right off the bat, and my brain turned to something else. But it's that, how has your faith, this last question, how has your faith impacted you as an entrepreneur, as a husband, father?
I feel like I have a lot of... I've never had a road to Damascus moment, I don't think, where I was there and the Lord spoke to me. And some people do. Awesome. When I try to just have God with me throughout the day as dialogue. And I'm also trying to give myself some grace and forgiveness that sometimes I'm just babbling. But I kind of treat that visually in my mind as like I'm a 3-year-old and he's the patient parent, which is sometimes I'm just babbling and just talking, or I'm frustrated and I'm kicking and crying, and he's just taking it in. And, so with that, I think you have to have that quiet time in that space. One of mine is super easy. I work from home. We've got a dog. And so when I go out and I take him out 4 or 5 times a day for a walk, 5 minutes, I don't bring my phone. And I try to use that to give me space and listen. I don't do it all the time. It doesn't work. Sometimes I get distracted, Slack message, whatever, and I'm thinking about random stuff. But you got to give yourself, if you're going to do this, especially if you're going to do this and have a faith as part of it, you've got to have some space and some downtime. I don't care how you do it. Swim, jog, do it in the shower. You got to have some space and some downtime to bring God into that journey and be like, is this what you're having me do? That's the question I wrestle with all day, every day. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Should I be doing something else? And so I try to ask for signals and in wisdom to make that decision, that if tomorrow God wants me to do something else, then I'll hopefully receive that message and do it. But I believe, I still haven't gotten the text. My phone's over there. I can look. That this is where I'm supposed to be, but I do wrestle with it.
Yeah, it's a normal part.
Yeah. I mean, as an ADHD adult, I'm like, what if I just completely missed it? And he's like, dude, no. For years I've been trying to get a hold of you.
That's funny.
So I do. I struggle with it, but I do believe in my heart that this is where I'm supposed to be.
That's awesome, man. I had such a great conversation.
I really enjoyed it. Time flew by.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So Guys, ExitGuide.com if you want to get more information as to what those steps look like. Again, if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, I don't know if I have everything put together, what does that process look like? Such great advice today. If you guys want to get a hold of Eric, I'm sure there's some kind of way of getting a hold of you through
Eric at ExitGuide.com, and it's Eric with a C.
Okay, ERIC at ExitGuide.com.
That's right. Yep.
That's awesome. Thank you for being on the show.
Yep. Thanks, George. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.